it looks like it's still gonna. Sorry, having some technical issues. Doesn't want to stream to my LinkedIn profile, but it looks like it'll still stream to the company page. Let's see. Just waiting for. There we go. All right, here we are. Welcome, everybody. Looks like we have a few people starting to show up. Welcome to another session of Consulting Growth Insights. Got a fun conversation planned today. I have Peter Winick with me, who is the founder and a leader of Thought Leadership Leverage. And as it so happens, we're going to be talking about thought leadership, the real kind of thought leadership, not the fake kind. So, Peter, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Yeah. So I want to start off with, I think definitions are important. And I think it's very common to hear people say things like, oh, we have to do more thought leadership, or we need more thought leadership content, or we need to be better thought leaders, whatever the heck any of those things mean. And honestly, I think a lot of time the people that say it, they mean well, but they don't really know what it means, which is why you get a lot of weird execution.
Yeah.
So,
right.
My definition kind of is like, what does it take to be a thought leader? And to me, it takes three things. And I'm curious on your thoughts on this, which is, well, first of all, there's thought and there's leadership. So you have to have some original thought. It needs to be a unique point of view on the market, the trends that exist. And those views and those thoughts need to be supported by some level of data. That can be empirical, it can be qualitative, it can be quantitative, all of the above, but supported by something, not just your opinions that are kind of, just philosophical in nature with no support. And then all of those things need to allow your thoughts to be recognized by your peers in the market that you're serving as leading the way. Like that to me is thought leadership. Your thoughts?
So, well, let me go backwards. I think the definition piece is critical, and I can give you one, and I want to comment on yours as well. It doesn't really matter which one you use or which one's right or better or whatever. At some level it does. But I think that if you're engaging in a conversation or a meeting, right? So I'm not a finance guy, but if I was in a meeting and the topic of the meeting was accounts receivable, all right, I know what I'm tuning in for. 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever. Okay. I know what's going to happen. Okay. Somebody's got to do this, whatever. I think what happens is people get brought into something and the headline is thought leadership or blah, blah, our thought leadership initiative. And somebody's thinking content marketing and somebody's thinking product and somebody's thinking formula. And so I think it's important to say, okay, for the context of what we're going to do, this initiative, this project, our company, whatever, when we talk about thought leadership, this is what we mean. And we don't want to get into the splitting of atoms on, oh, is that content marketing, thought leadership, whatever. Yeah, we can. But I think step one, if you're engaged, if you're responsible for the development, the creation, the curation of thought leadership at your entity, you're responsible for calibrating what that definition is. And maybe you want to make that like a little workshop-y thing. Hey, what do you think it means? What do you think it means? But at the end of the day, land on it. So when everybody's tuned in, I always say it's like if I leave my car in my driveway at the jazz station and then I come in the next morning and it's like hardcore punk rock, I'm like, whoa, somebody violated what my expectation was. Right? Like that wasn't what I was expecting to happen out of the audio system. So back to what you said, I think, if we break up a couple of the pieces, and if I got them wrong, correct me. Original idea, I would say originally unique, but it could be lowercase, right? So original doesn't mean the world is flat, the world is round. It could be an incremental angle, addition, perspective. It doesn't need to be, because at some level there's nothing new under the sun.
Correct.
I always look at it and say, here's this body of work that existed before me and will exist after I'm gone, right? What is it that I'm adding to the conversation? And like you said, the thoughtfulness, it could be my opinion. That's only going to get me so far unless I'm the loudest clown in the room or the most charismatic or whatever. But it could be based on data. It could be based on observation. It could be based on lots of different things. But how are you coming to that? And you're standing on the proverbial shoulders of giants there. So I think that's really important. The what unique means, and then the leadership piece I think is really the courage to take the conversation in a little bit of a different direction or a lot of
Yeah.
different direction or get people to even just question, hey, here's what you thought about the state of X marketing. I'm going to introduce some new thought leadership that might get you to think about that differently.
Hmm.
You can agree with me or not, doesn't really matter, but let me make my case, and then it's up to you to say, wow, that's a better way of looking at the world than I did
Yeah.
before, or that's a different place. I can see times where I would do that.
Yep. Yeah. It's interesting. I like that you brought up the word courage, because I think what it gets back to in my mind is, I think there's sometimes a misconception or confusion between expertise and thought leadership. Like, are you an expert, or are you a thought leader? And it's like one of those, like, is a square a rectangle? Yes. Is a rectangle a square? No. Right. It's kind of that to me,
Well,
like, is an expert a thought leader? Not always. Is a
no,
thought
but
leader
well,
always
think
an
about
expert?
it.
Yeah.
Like you can go to get your taxes done. That person is an expert in tax
Mhm.
preparation, I would hope.
Yep.
Might they be a leader in, a thought leader in tax or financial planning or whatever? No, probably not. And it's probably not even a prereq of whether
Yep.
you'd engage with that person. So they're different now, and that goes along the lines of anything, the technical domain. There's a lot of people we engage with that are technically experts at what they do, an anesthesiologist, a lawyer, whatever. They don't necessarily need to lead
Yep.
anesthesia practices into a different domain. They do, that's lovely, but that's not necessarily what a patient is looking for.
Yep. Yeah. Well, that's. I mean, I don't know if we'll have time to get into it, but there's a to me there's an interesting subgroup here, if you will, which is the regulated industries where you have to be licensed, right? Like that's almost like a
Yeah,
separate kind of conversation of, okay, yes, you have to have a license to be the expert, but what does it take to be a real thought leader in that space? And that's almost like a
yeah, but you
slightly
said
different
something
conversation.
earlier, Mike, about sort of the who.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that you could have brilliant thought leadership that is irrelevant to 99.99% of the world, and that's okay. So
Hmm.
once you've clearly defined your avatars, your who, the
Yeah.
markets that you're serving, et cetera, it's easier to increase the relevance to the smallest population. And oftentimes when I'm talking to somebody early on before they become a client and I ask them, well, who does this resonate with and who's your target market, whatever. And there's sort of two answers to that on a continuum. One is, oh, everybody. That's the worst answer.
Hmm.
Because unless you've got, the $50 billion marketing budget to, like Procter and Gamble does,
Yeah.
you can't afford to be all things to all people. The other answer I get is, oh, I'm interested, or my work applies really well to newly minted managers in high growth, high tech spaces that have never been in a people management role before. I'm like, oh, okay, totally get that. Like I could work with that. And I think part of defining the who, there's a lazy way to do it, and then there's a harder way to do it. Not harder, a more accurate, I should say. Lazy is demographics. Click the
Hmm.
boxes on LinkedIn of age, rank, serial number, income. Like, okay, so
Yep.
44-year-old women with a bachelor's degree that live in Cleveland that make 62 grand. Okay, if I was able to click that off in 30 seconds, so could everybody else. It's not all that valuable. I think the real separating the chaff from the wheat, if you will, it comes on the psychographic. Are they lifelong learners? What's their propensity to risk? Are they open to new ideas? Like, there's no
Hmm.
box on LinkedIn for that. You got to
Yep.
work harder to find them. But when you resonate on that level, that's sticky
Yep.
stuff.
Yep. Yeah. It- that's all very fresh in my mind. I was just finishing up a positioning workshop with a client right before we jumped on, and that's a big part of conversation around positioning, which is like, who is your ICP? Like, who are these ideal people? And it's, again, like you said, the easy way is, oh, it's companies of X size that are in this industry
Right.
that do X,
Right.
Y, and Z, whatever. It's like, okay, great, but what are some other ways that you can look at it? Right, which is like, where are you most successful? Where are who do your people enjoy working the most with, et cetera, et cetera. You get all these different lenses of what it is, and somewhere in the middle is like, that's my ideal, right? And then you layer in all the psychographics on top of that, and or with that, and
Yes.
you get to something very, very specific that you can then go, okay, I now know who I'm speaking to, and I have an opinion or this unique thought that I think they will find relevant based on what they are and what they do and how they think. And I can
Yeah,
get
I
them
think
thinking
that's
from that.
right. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's let's talk about, okay, we define what thought leadership is. And I think I like what you said, which is, you know, the definition to a certain extent doesn't matter, like it does, but it doesn't, as long as the organization is clear. To
Right.
me, like, I think the one thing that's important is like thought leadership is it's an outcome, not an activity, right? You become a thought leader. You can't just, snap your fingers and put stuff out like I'm a thought leader. Like that's not just not how it works. Um,
Well, and I think anybody that calls themselves a thought leader,
yeah, there's
don't do that. I mean,
yeah,
it's me. I always look at it as a term of endearment, respect, whatever,
yes,
that others in your space, your field, your industry, your entity, whatever. Mike's
yeah,
really a thought
yeah,
leader in marketing
yep,
versus if you went out there and branded yourself, Mike, the
yep,
marketing thought leader. Like
yep.
I'm not tuning into that.
Yeah, my favorite like LinkedIn headlines are like innovator, thought leader, futurist. It's like, okay, hold on now. If you're telling the world about that, is that really true? So
Right.
totally agree with that. So let's talk about, okay, what does it take to become a thought leader, right? We kind of talked about the high level of it, but in my view, it really again that those unique thoughts that we talked about, they have to be synthesized into something that's, for lack of a better word, a little bit more tangible, right? Like what I call it IP. I think you do as well. Like it's
Yeah.
some level of intellectual property that you can put out there consistently that makes people think differently.
Yeah. I mean, you've got to have ideas. I mean, so what does it take? Unlike most professions, there's no clear point of when you cross the finish line. I graduated dental school. I got my MBA.
Yep.
There's no like, I got my CP. Like, there's no, okay. So there's a governing body that said, it's on the wall,
Yep.
whatever. So I
Thought
think that,
leadership certificate.
yeah, right, right. So to me, what are the tools of the trade? What are the basics? Well, you've got to have your body of work, right? So that's your models, your methods, your frameworks, your methodology, and such. And those are, you know, ideas, right? And then you've got to package them into something to make them digestible, right? So that's the content, the format. And there's content that you would charge money for and content that you wouldn't, right? How do you express that idea in short form, in long form, in video, whatever, in a community as part of a tool or an assessment, etc. So I think what ties it all together is the platform, what I call the platform, right? Because most thought leaders are really, really smart and can speak to more than what they're known for. The reality is when you're positioning your thought leadership, you need to be all thought leadership all the time, right? Nobody cares. Well, I shouldn't say that, but the market doesn't care so much about your other hobbies, other passions, other interests. Those are distractions. I
Yep.
need to know when I go to Mike's a marketing expert. That's what I'm talking to Mike about. Now, I might also realize that, Mike's a dad. Mike lives in this part of the country. Mike likes, yeah, those are things that we'll learn about one another once we get to know each other. But why am I coming to you versus the 82,000 other marketing
Hmm.
folks? Maybe I read your articles. Maybe I'm listening to this podcast, this LinkedIn Live. Maybe you've put out there models and methods and framework that make me go, huh, tell me more. That's interesting. What do you got there? How does that
Yep.
work? And then obviously everything that you do, your thought leadership is sort of baked into it. So I know you're setting an expectation of when I engage with you, these are your principles, your philosophies, whatever. And you're also, what you don't include is just as well, right? Hey, you don't come to Mike to create the best listicles or clickbait. That's not his thing. Plenty of other people that do that. If that's your thing, whatever, you're probably not talking to the right guy if that's what you're talking to Mike about.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. I think um I like the idea or what you brought up around kind of its thought leadership all the time, right? I do think that you I struggle with like the LinkedIn experts, for example. They go, gurus, quote unquote, like, oh, bring your full self and authentic self and this, that, and the other. I'm like, yeah, sure, fine. Like every once in a while, like I'll put an important family post up there, maybe once a year or something like that,
Yeah.
kind of deal. But at the end of the day, that's not what. If you're at the end of the day, we're the only reason you want to become a thought leader is because it's going to bring you business. And if that is the case, then then you have to be focused on those things, right? Because people aren't going to give you business just because you have a cute kid or whatever whose photos you post on LinkedIn or that kind of
Right. Well, and I think the other
thing.
thing you have to be cognizant of is we're living in a unique period of time, if you think about history, where it was always information hoarding, scarcity of information,
Yeah.
whoever owned the libraries, owned the land, like whatever. Now it's like anybody anywhere can get access to almost anything. So the
Hmm.
scarcity of information is not the issue. It's who am I going to trust to curate it to me? Who am I going to trust for an interpretation for
Hmm.
their insights and such? So I don't have to wade through a bunch of stuff because we could Google marketing expert now and probably spend literally months wading through an ocean of garbage to find a gem, right? I want to
Yeah.
find that gem and then bookmark that gem or subscribe to that gem or whatever it is and say, wow, that's one of the few people I trust because if I invest a couple bucks in something that you do and it doesn't work, so be it. I can make more money.
Yeah.
The worst thing that I could say about somebody's thought leadership is, wow, that's an hour of my life I'll never get back after going through that.
Yep. Or these days, it's like, oh, I could have just asked ChatGPT.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think I like that you brought up curation because I think it brings up yeah, you talk about this, and I'm sure it's a big topic of conversation with your clients. Like the world of thought leadership is drastically changing, right? Like for a while, access to information wasn't a problem, even before Gen AI came to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now you have a $20 a month, 24/7 curator at your fingertips,
Right.
right? Like it can curate any information you want. Now the question becomes, how good is it at curating really the right type of information and putting it in front of you in a way that you relate to? And that's where, in my mind, like where the frameworks and methodologies and the IP has to be rooted in personal stories, personal experience, empirical type of observational stuff. Obviously qualitative is important as well.
Sure.
um, but those are the things that AI can't match, right? At least as of right now. Who knows what will happen in a year or two? But like the
Well, listen, AI is great, but to me, it's like any other tool,
yeah,
right? So, uh, you know, could I use, a hammer to I don't know, open a door? Y- Yeah, I could. Like, is it the right tool to use to get a doorknob to turn? No, it's not, right? So, I think there's great opportunity to use thought leadership, but it doesn't replace. And this is where I think laziness is what it is. It's not a replacement for critical thinking. It's an input, right? So if I'm researching something,
yeah,
wow, chat's awesome. It could find things I haven't, and I can say, "Well, tell it to me in a more technical way. Tell it to me in the way that I
yeah,
might explain that to a 15-year-old. Tell it to me just I would explain that to someone where English isn't like, wow, and it could do that like lightning fast. That's pretty cool. But you have to synthesize that, right? And I think the where chat gets a bad rap is we've all seen some of this garbage on social, and you're like within a millisecond, you're like, that wasn't written by a human, right? Now, it might have all the data correct, all the facts
yep,
correct, all the like blah, blah, you try to reverse engineer. Why is that? Well, because it just doesn't, nobody talks like that. Nobody thinks like that, whatever. And if you see where chat's working now, it's things like writing up the local high school basketball game, very
yeah,
formulaic, you know, Greenberg scored 9 shots today. Winick scored like, okay, who won? Who like there's a formula. And you know what? Unless you're like such an aficionado of high school basketball, that's probably sufficient relative to the cost of the media outlet,
right,
what it's going to take to put a human on. So something is a trade-off, right?
yeah, yeah, 100%. And again, I think that's also where the idea, going back to very originally we were talking about, like this, it's original thought. It's what is something new that I'm adding to this existing knowledge that's out there with my views and opinions backed by you know things in the market and data, et cetera. Like those are things that can't be created with AI, right? It's not.
Right.
It's synthesizing existing things that are out there rather than um, creating these new layers and new frameworks and things like that. So let's talk about, okay, we know we need original thought. We know we need to package it up. We know that it needs to be relevant. And really what we're talking about is building a platform. Okay, what does that look like? What does I know your answer is going to be, well, it depends. Who are you? What are you doing? But in, and I agree that everything is nuance, right? But how should somebody think about building their platform? What are the things that they should be considering?
Yeah, it's a good question. So if you start everything at the center of it all is to whom are you serving, right? If this isn't just some academic exercise, who
Yeah.
am I serving, right? So once you've got and you might have 3, 4, 5 avatars that you serve. So why is what you have to say most relevant to them? Then you have to have a little bit of empathy here and say, how do they prefer to consume content? And I think this is where you have to be self-aware and say, you know what? Um, my preferences are not normal. I actually read a physical newspaper. I like the tactileness of it. I read 2 books a week. So I could say, oh, well, obviously everybody in the world is like me and they read a newspaper and 2 books a week. And if I built a platform or built a business on that, that would fail because that's an anomaly. So you have to say, okay, forget me. I'm not relevant. The people that I'm trying to reach, what do they like? Oh, they prefer short form video. They're academics. They prefer the data. Okay, great. So then I have to be aware that I probably suffer from a content creation preference, right? That is also how I prefer to consume content. Writers tend to read. People that are more
Yeah.
verbal tend to, like you and I have podcasts. I'm a better talker than I am a writer. I like to read and I'd prefer to engage in conversation,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you're saying, oh, I don't like the way my voice sounds, or I don't like to be on video, blah, blah, blah. Okay, great. Another way to frame what you're saying is, okay, I've chosen to not participate in 70% of the market. And you say, well, why would you do that? Like, well, of course you wouldn't. So then the issue is get over yourself, figure it out. Like if you haven't done video, play with video. If you haven't gone short form, play. It's just an experiment. Like you're not gonna die, right, by trying new things. But if your market is on TikTok or Insta, whatever the platform is or the format or the modality is, and you're not there, guess what? Your competitors are there and you're going to lose. Or it also says something about you. Why isn't that person there? Do they not get
Right.
it? Do they, I wouldn't hire a 24-year-old life coach and, I wouldn't hire a nutritionist that's 100 pounds overweight.
Yep. Yeah, you have to be drinking your own Kool-Aid, if you will.
Exactly.
Yep. Yeah, it's funny, personal story there. Like very early on in my entrepreneurial career, I was running a marketing agency, and we had one of the things we did was social media management, whatever. It was way back in the day, and uh, we had a client. We were giving them all these recommendations. They're like, "Well, but you guys aren't really posting much on LinkedIn." We're like, "Oh, all right, you're
Ouch.
right. We're not. Ouch." Right?
Busted. Right.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. So you have to show show, not tell, right? Um, so what about again, kind of going back to the IP part. So we can pick our channels based on where people are, etc. Formats, things like that. But what about the IP itself? Like, what is the work that you believe is entailed in creating that, synthesizing that body of work, like you said, and packaging it up into something that's consumable that you can share across all these platforms and channels and mediums, if you will.
Yeah. So there's a lot of ways to get there, right? It could be anything from a validated academic study that's a, 10-year longitudinal study. It could be synthesizing the boundaries of 2 disciplines, right? What does culture and sales have to think about that? How do I put that together? I think it's really a matter of the way that you frame it, of a way that you articulate it. in its simplest form. So one thing I'll say to folks when I'm engaging with them is, okay, wow, tell me what, what your stuff is. And they go on and on. And I'm like, whoa, this is like really like swimming in pea soup. I'm like, okay, time out. Explain this to me like I'm an 8-year-old. What is this? What does it do? Who benefits from, like, just really, really simple, right? And it's hard to make things simple. It's difficult to make things simple. But like, think about some of the legendary platforms from a thought leadership perspective. 7 Habits of a Highly Effective People. Covey,
Yep.
going back 35 years. Oh, wait a minute. Now that one statement answers a lot of questions. Is this innate? Is this a characteristic? Is this trait? No, it's a habit. Okay. So habits I can develop, right? Yeah. Are there a lot of them? Is this a lifetime pursuit? Is this Buddhism? No, there's 7. I think I can handle 7 things of highly successful people. Am I that, or do I want to be that? No, I'm a content loser, so this probably isn't for me. Yeah, I consider myself highly successful, or I aspire to be. So then it's like check, check, check. There's a whole bunch of self-selection there that goes into that. Start with the end in mind. You sharpen the saw, and they're all fairly standard and simple, but there's a reason people keep going back to them. I mean, I'm in meetings all the time where people say, whoa, let's start with the end in mind. I don't even know if they know that's attributable to Covey. It's become,
Right.
trusted advisor, right? That framework came from 3 guys, David Maister, Charles Green, and I forget the third person. That was a book written 25, 30 years ago that came out of their experience. That's become part of the business lexicon. That's the ultimate sort of
Yep.
litmus test, right?
Yeah. I mean, same thing with like jobs to be done. I mean, it's a little bit more complex,
Yeah.
but it's still like so many people throw out jobs to be done, not realizing that it was created by, Clay Christensen
Yeah.
and, what it even really is. But yeah, same thing.
Yeah. So I think sometimes thought leaders spend more time going deep because that's their comfort food. They're analytical. They can be academic. They can, they
Yep.
want to be the smartest guy or gal in the room, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, go light. Like, get that as simple as, can you divide it in 2? Can you divide it in 2 again? Can you get like, what are these little tiny
Can you give it to me
ideas?
in a four
Then
in
you
a
can
in
build
a
them
in
up.
a 4-box matrix? That's
Yeah,
like,
right. Or Venn diagram. Right, right,
yeah,
right.
yeah. Those are my favorite. Like, make it simple and visual so that my pea brain can understand it. Yep.
Well, then I think the other thing is, once someone is able to look at that idea for a moment, they're looking through a lens and they can't unsee the world the same way after that. So, like, if you've ever read Carol Dweck's Growth Mindset, right? You're like, oh, fixed mindset, growth mindset, whatever. You don't realize how sticky that is. And then 15, 20 years later, be like, do I have a fixed mindset on that? I consider myself open-minded, but wait, maybe like it's really, oh, I get that.
Yep. So, and I think that's where maybe the rest of this conversation I'll have to dive into, which is this idea of punching above your weight class. I mean, that's what I titled this
Yeah.
conversation. And I think that stickiness that you just mentioned really is that, right? That is the ability for an idea that is something that was complex made simple to become sticky is, in my mind, this like the superpower, if you will, of thought leadership, that anybody can punch above their weight class because anybody can create, in theory, an idea that becomes really sticky. You don't have to be a billion-dollar
Well,
organization.
and what I would add with that, if you and I were sitting around one day and said, let's go be management consultants, right? We're going to go and let's say it's just 25 years ago. Well,
Yeah.
what's the competitive landscape? McKinsey, they've been around a long time. They're multi-billion dollar. We're probably not going to be able to do that. Well, today we can sit around and say, you know what? We're 2 smart guys. We've got these models. We've got these methods. We've got these frameworks. If somebody sees that idea, they will accept it for what it is, right? At first blush, before doing any work, before it having to be backed up by a McKinsey or a Harvard or a whatever. So I think we're living in this great time where if you put in the work and you put in the reps to come up with great ideas, that's where you punch above your weight class. And you can put that out there to your prospects, your clients, to the marketplace, to the industry, whatever, in multiple formats and modalities. Because there's sort of high level 2 use cases for thought leadership. Number one, that's the product offering solution that you sell. I'm an author, I'm a keynote speaker. You pay me for that. The other use case for thought leadership is what I call the organizational use case, where I'm in high tech, I'm in financial services, I'm in professional services, and there are others, right? And I want to show the world that you're going to be interfacing, you're going to be working with an organization that's smart, that gets you, that sees you, that's innovative, that's thoughtful. So we're going to put these ideas out there to punch above our weight class, to get you out of your trance, to show you that this is how we think. And then there's some self-selection, right? Because if you think the world is flat and I tell you the world is round and everything I publish is about the beauty of the round earth, you're probably not going to call me. And if you
Yep.
did call me, I don't want to waste my time because I'm not getting paid for it, convincing you as a knucklehead that the world is no longer flat,
Yep.
right? Because you don't get paid, the meter's not running. So when people are consuming your thought leadership before they come to you, I love it where we'll have someone reach out to us. They've been on our newsletter or followed our podcast or whatever. And in a conversation with them, they'll quote me to me. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's like my close rate on
Yep.
that is like 95%
Yep.
because they know what to, or think they know at least what to expect when engaging with us, which is
Yep.
awesome.
Yep. Or you jump on a discovery call like, hey, I saw this post about such and such. Totally hit home. It's like you're listening to my conversations or whatever. Like, yep, there we go.
Exactly. Exactly.
The when when we think about the development of the IP and how do we how should people be thinking about doing that work? You said, like, if somebody's willing to put in the work, put in the reps, and develop these great ideas, what does that look like in your mind? Like, maybe some
Well,
of the processes you take clients
I
through, that
think
kind of thing.
on one end, there are ready, aim, 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 never fire people with the excuses it's not ready. I got to
Yeah.
get one more data point. They're polishing the stone in perpetuity. I like to think as thought leadership, particularly in this day and age, as ready, fire, aim. Put something out there, not a book, right? Because a book is a big effort, but like, hey, I got an idea, I got a hypothesis. Let me play with it. Let me do a little bit of research.
Yeah.
Let me put an article out. Let's put it on LinkedIn. Because where we're not really good as humans yet is deciding in advance what will resonate best with the markets that
Mm-hmm.
we serve.
Yep.
So I think you put stuff out there. No one's like, listen, get over yourself. Nobody's going to look at that and go, wow, Mike, you put this thing out there, this idea. It was really awful and stupid. Therefore, you're horrible. Therefore, I'll never work with you. Therefore, you're going to be homeless and never feed your children. It's the end of the world. Like, that's just not going to, but we tend to think like that. Like,
Yeah.
oh, they'll think less of me. Like, whatever. We don't know what they're going to think. And by the way, get over yourself. In 2 days, they're not going to remember what the hell it was anyway. Or it was the nugget of something that grew to something else. So I think, think of it as an experiment early on, the things that you put out,
Yeah.
and then polish it. So ways to, I think part of what you're asking is how do I keep working on it? Okay. Well, how might you express that idea to a senior leadership team, to a board of directors, to, what are the nuances if I were going to if I was going to jump on a plane and go to Buenos Aires tomorrow and deal with a bunch of executives in Argentina versus Singapore, like, is it global? Is it universal? And you might say, well, it's universal, but there's some North American stuff in there we got to play with. Like, those are the things I would be thinking about.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I like I like the ready, fire, aim thing. I completely agree
Yeah.
with it. Tactically, one of the things I talk to my clients about is, like, if we believe that thought leadership and your IP is the highest leveraged asset that you have or that you can have, and that means that creating that asset is probably one of the highest leverage activities that you can do. How do you accelerate that? And that's where I get into things like, okay, well, yes, you can, like, LinkedIn is an amazing platform for it. So are other social channels. Again, going back to who's our who and where are they, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's TikTok, maybe whatever, depending on where you are. Like, if you're an e-commerce
Yeah.
person,
Yep.
maybe it's TikTok, whatever. But from there, one of the things I really like to do and get people to think about is, like, well, you can accelerate through advertising and paid media, especially on all these platforms. Like,
Yeah.
I spend real dollars, not a ton, but real dollars promoting my content to the exact people who I want it, who I want
Right.
to engage with, and get accelerated feedback on it,
Well, let
accelerated
me give you a
comments,
couple of
accelerated
thoughts on that.
engagement.
Yeah. So I think most people tend to think in a logical and linear way, and that's fine,
Yeah.
right? So I've got this idea. I'm going to polish it up. I'm going to do some research. I'm going to publish a thing, a book, a article, whatever. And then after that, I'll put it up on social and dot, dot, dot. Rainbows and unicorns. Good stuff's going to happen. Magic, poof, whatever. I'm like, you know what? Most thought leaders are pretty awful at sales and marketing and business development. Okay, that's a general statement. I'm painting with a wide brush. There are examples of those that aren't. But in my experience doing this for 20 years, 90% are pretty awful at that. Don't enjoy it, don't like it, et cetera, et cetera. But they're really good at the thought leadership piece. Well, how do we compensate for that? How do we conflate the two? So I'm saying, oh, if I'm going to write a series of articles on, I don't know, whatever the issue might be, how to break through the noise in a crowded marketplace. And heads of communication at global nonprofits are my client base. Why don't I interview 10 heads of communications at not, at those entities and say, hey, I'm doing a series of articles or videos or whatever it is. And I'm talking to people like you. Can we have a
Mhm.
conversation? Well, we're like you and I are creating thought leadership right now. This is just a conversation and you hit record on it. That's all this is, right?
Yep.
And I'm learning right now. I hope you're learning. Whoever else is listening to this is learning. Really, really cool. And you and I have developed a relationship because we prepared for this. We spoke a couple weeks ago. This is the stuff, and it doesn't feel like work. And if you're trying to sell me, you're the seller, I'm the buyer. I have to go. If I'm a buyer, I need to be skeptical. I need to lock up my checkbook. I need to not trust this guy, whatever. But if we're having a conversation about something we're both passionate about, or both have an interest in, or both curious about, we're on equal footing. And actually, I'm looking at you as the expert, right?
Mhm.
So I think you figure out how to compensate for the weaknesses that you have individually or as an entity and see
Mhm.
where can thought leadership compensate for that. And it's not a Swiss Army knife where it does all things for everything, but there are opportunities to use it to develop relationships, to develop business, to build rapport, build, all those sort of things.
Yeah, 100%. And I think um, the idea that you brought up is one that I really like, and I encourage clients when I work with them to really think about is like, a lot of the times, in professional services, which is my, consulting and whatever, that's my uh, that's my client base. And for most of those firms, the boutique firms that I work with, they have one or two rainmakers,
Right.
which is like the entire business quite literally depends on the network and the ideas of these one or two people. And they may or may not be great thought leaders necessarily. They might have a really great network, and they might have decent ideas. It might be the other
Yeah.
way around.
Yeah.
But the thinking about, okay, well, how do we develop assets and systems to kind of combine the two? Like you said, maybe it's a podcast, maybe it's an interview series, maybe it's an event that you host,
Yeah.
maybe it's a roundtable dinner, right? Thought leadership can take. I think that's the other thing maybe bring up is it can take any form, and it can be mass media, or it can be like really focused and
No,
small
no,
and
and I'll give you
repurposed and whatever.
a real life example. We're at the 5-year plus or minus mark from when COVID hit, right? So
Yep.
when COVID initially hit, um, as a consultant, as an expert, I was in a position where, wow, all my clients, all these people are reaching out to me going, "What do I do? What do I do?" And I was like, "Okay, I wasn't around during the Spanish flu. I know I've got a little bit of gray hair. I don't know." And that takes a little bit of courage to say, "Holy crap, like I have some ideas. Initially, we thought this would be a long weekend or 2 week, like whatever." So I didn't feel comfortable. I didn't like being in a place where I can't give people some insight, some advice that they could apply and get out of a jam because that's what consultants do. So I stayed up and I'm struggling with this, and said, okay, I got two things. I've got a Zoom account that's like the plus account, so because I'm paying $40 a month, so I can get a lot of access, and I have a really good network. Let's just throw it out there. And I put a post up on LinkedIn, and we created the Tuesday Crew. Tuesdays at 1 o'clock, and we did it literally every week for 3 years. Then we went to 2 weeks, and then we sunset it. And I had anywhere from 30 to 100 people on it. And from those, calls, 8 or 10 books were written, unbelievable amount of collaborations, relationships, and I still get a rainbow effect. And I didn't do that with saying, okay, people are going to pay for this or
Yeah.
that or whatever. You know, it was just, we're all going crazy. We all don't know it. Let's support one another. And I still get emails today. I mean, I got an email a couple of weeks ago saying, wow, the 5-year anniversary is coming up. We should get the crew back together. So I think it's next week or the week after we're doing a like, I don't know, reunion or whatever.
Yep.
Uh,
Nice.
of that. And people are writing me all the time, like, oh yeah, you might not even know that so and so and so and so and I wrote a book and it got picked up in HBO. I'm like, that's pretty freaking cool, right? And it didn't cost me anything. I mean, it's my time, but that's an example of using. Wow, we're all jammed. We're all struggling with this. What do we do?
Yep. Yeah, and I think that's again that gets into this idea of great, you've got expertise, you've got your IP, you're an expert in developing thought leadership and thought leaders. How do you evangelize that? Well, something just happened, had something happened in the world that allowed you to go, well, I can do it this way. Let's try it. Right? What's the
Exactly.
worst that'll happen? Now, again, would you go and write a book about it right away? No, of course you wouldn't. Or would you go and put on a, highly produced virtual event with whatever? Like, no, you wouldn't do that either. Maybe now you would after you've kind of figured things out and realize what people want and need and how, et cetera. But the first iteration is always crap, realistically. Like if you really like not
Well,
you
there's
have to.
that, and then there's also timeless versus timely. So
Mm,
right now, I'm seeing a flood of books on AI, and I look at them and go,
yep.
these are really magazine articles, cover stories, because we know if they're not already outdated by the time they hit the shelves,
Yep.
in 6 months, this is totally useless, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things I look at to say, well, this is good thought leadership is okay, regardless of did the stock market go up 2,000 points today? Are we in a recession? What's going on in the world? Who's in the White House? Whatever. These principles are true. So, 7 habits that we talked about,
Yep.
they're immune to reality, to whatever's going on in the world today. Then the next question is, okay, so if these are evergreen principles, the 10 commandments, if you will, that are true irregardless, then you have to say, okay, when COVID first hit, everybody, not everybody, but lots and lots of people were like, uh-oh, how do I run an effective team remotely? Because we've never done this before
Mhm.
or whatever. So there was a flood of that content. Now you might say, well, let's go back to 7 habits. Start with the end in mind. What's the end in mind? I have a team. We have these deliverables. Okay. So now I could apply 7 habits to a
Yes.
contemporary problem. And by the way, if I was to go out to you today, Mike, and said, have a good idea. Let's write a book on how to manage teams remotely today. You'd be like, dude, you probably missed the boat. Like, is it still a thing? Yeah. Is it the thing it was 5 years ago, 4.5 years ago, 4 years ago? Absolutely not. Most people
Right.
have figured it out, and if you haven't, you're probably a dinosaur at this point.
Yeah. Now you're writing the different book, which is like, how do I get people to come back to the office?
Right, no, exactly right, right. Well, now it is the case for return to,
Yeah.
and we can argue the whys and the whos and the culture and whatever, but
Yeah.
right, the pendulum has swung the other way.
No, I think that's a fascinating and a really powerful way to look at it because um, the f- the the frameworks, the methodologies that you develop, they have to be. I mean, timeless is maybe pushing it because like who really knows
Evergreen.
what's going to be really timeless? Like
Yeah,
you hope that it will be, but it's got to be at least you believe with a fairly good degree of confidence that it's going to be evergreen. And then, like you said, it's about the way that you become, the way that you show your expertise is saying, well, now I can apply this to these different nuanced things that are either timely or relevant to a specific industry versus
yeah,
another, etc. Like
right,
that's
so
thought
if I were
leadership.
to say to you, Mike, here's an assignment for you. Take Dale Carnegie's How to Make Friends and Influence People and do an edition for on LinkedIn. Full stop.
Yep.
You could do that.
Yep.
Right. So that's an evergreen book.
Mhm.
What is the book? What's the promise of the book? You're going to make friends and influence people.
Yep.
Did we want to do that in 1935? Yes. Do we want to do that today in 2025? Okay.
Mhm.
If you wrote that book today and didn't have IP in there baked around social, you'd be looked at like,
Yep.
okay, who's Rip Van Winkle over here? What's going on? But obviously, when that book was written, whatever it was, 80, 90, 100 years ago, that wasn't part of
Yep.
the conversation.
Yep. Well, so a real life example I'll give you that I've gone through, which is my frameworks around positioning. Um, the way that those came about was, and this kind of ties a couple of concepts together. One is it's not really like original. I used existing bodies of work by, like you said, standing on the shoulders of giants, which in my case were Daniel Kahneman and
Mhm.
Brian Schwartz, right? So it's the
Yep.
concepts of paradox of choice and prospect theory. Um, I mean, but it's putting it leveraging those concepts for positioning. And that's where
Right.
the whole idea of de-risking and whatnot came to be, right? And that's now I can take that, I can apply it to a bunch of different industries. I can apply it. It definitely applies to today's market, I believe, right? In terms of how people are,
Yeah.
the fact that there's more and more choice and all this kind of stuff. I'm not going to go and give my pitch or anything here, but
Yeah.
like, but that's the real life example of how those two things tie together, which is using existing stuff that's out there, making it evergreen. Like the concept of de-risking, actually, for that matter, has existed in other industries. Like I didn't make it up, even for that matter. Like
Yeah.
it's common in financial space, and it's common
Yeah.
in like med device development
Correct.
and biotech and whatever. But it's not really ever been applied to uh, positioning and marketing and whatnot.
Hmm.
So there we are.
There we go.
Um,
Cool. Yes.
Maybe one last thing to touch on is um, more tactical. Like how do you think about what should be part of the platform? Like, and you kind of maybe touched on this already, but like everybody thinks, oh, thought leadership, I got to write a book, or I got to have a podcast, or like that's where a lot of I feel like things go to, is I have to do this thing, this tactical X, Y, or Z, whatever that is, whatever their competitors are doing or whatever. How do you help people kind
Yeah.
of think through that?
So, I mean, the way I would think about that from a strategy standpoint is what are our goals and objectives here? What are we trying to achieve? Right? Is this to elevate the brand? Is it about cost effectively acquiring net new customers? Is this about uh, being positioned as a talent magnet organization? Like, what does success look like? Start there, okay, and then what is the most efficient path to get there? So some people talk about writing a book, and it's like, listen, the way I've talked more people out of writing books, not because the idea isn't there. In some instances, that's been the case because the timing's not right for it. Right. So the ideas aren't as refined. They don't have enough case studies. They whatever. Because I'm always thinking about, okay, so if you're writing a book, then what? So it is really hard to get people to buy books. It is harder to get people to read the books. It's harder to get people to actually take those ideas and internalize them and do something with it. What is it that we want them to do? Right. Like I talked to somebody earlier today whose book's coming out in a couple of weeks. I said, okay, we're going to make a call a year from today. And the book was a wild success. What is that? What are we going to talk about on that call? And I had this blank stare of like, well, it's probably not going to be number of units sold. I can tell you that. Right.
Yeah.
So is it that your brand has been elevated? You picked up, you're a consultant and you picked up a handful of clients, and this was a good way to do, like, what is that it? And then figure out what's the least amount I need to do to get to that, you know? Like we've got a podcast. I'm 650 some odd episodes in. I didn't start it saying I'm going to do this for 7 years. I started
Yeah.
saying, I'm committing to 30 or 50 episodes. I'm going to experiment with this. And the objective is A, B, and C. And if that works, like anything else in the budget, it will continue to get funded. If
Yep.
not, it won't, because funding is not just the dollars, it's my time. And I happen to enjoy it. I like it.
Yep.
We've never taken $1 in advertising, but I've made millions of dollars from the podcast. Why? Because people that come on learn about who we are and what we do, and a subset of them may become clients today or refer us to other
Yep.
clients. So I can attribute business to it, look at that annually, divide that by my cost of running the podcast and my time. I'm like, okay, this is a no-brainer. This is a
Yep.
10x ROI.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a really good way for people to think about it, which is, again, start with the end in mind, as we've said several times already, right? It's what are we hoping to achieve, and then what are I like the minimum viable, if you will, kind of thought, or like, well,
And I'll
what's
give you
what?
the flip side of that is when to stop doing something. So I've had
Mm,
many clients
yeah.
that come to me and they're showing me sort of their portfolio and their stuff. Say, "Oh, I'm a contributor. I write for Forbes or Fortune or notable
Yep.
publication." I'm like, "Okay, let's talk about that. What do you do?" "Oh, I put out 2 articles a month." "Okay, how long does that take you?"
Yeah.
It's about, 10, 12 hours a month. Okay. How long you been doing that? Oh, 3 years. Okay. Do they pay you? No. Okay, that's fine. So what's the value that you've gotten from it? Well, I'm a Forbes contributor. Okay. Well, we could say that at your eulogy because you did it once, right? So if you're
Yeah.
spending X hours a month times X years times this, can you attribute a client that's come to you from that? Can you attribute? And they'd be like,
Yeah.
no. I'm like, okay, well, then we're going to stop doing that activity. And they look at me like, oh my God, I'm taking their security blanket away. And they're
Hmm.
like, well, why would I do that? I'm a Forbes contributor. I'm like, well, what was your objective? Free labor to go work for somebody for free? You've got the brand, you've got the distribution. It's not serving the purpose, which is what you came to me for, of growing my business at a rapid rate. So I want to take that energy, that time, that effort that you're putting into
Yep.
clearly something that's not effective from that perspective and experiment with a couple other things to get you clients cost
Yep.
effective.
Yep. Yep. Well, in that example, my question would also be like, well, why? Like, if it's not doing anything, well, why is it? Is it that the stuff you're putting out isn't very good? Maybe is the IP not there? Are the ideas not resonating, or is it that your people aren't really reading Forbes?
Right, or they might say, "You know what? That's a good idea. I don't wanna give it up." I'm like,
Yeah.
"Okay, well, let's go to once a quarter, and let's have another objective, which is there's some ideas I'm working on. This would be a good place to validate some thoughts that I have, or to
Yeah.
hijack the Forbes brand and say, 'Hey, I'm a contributor at Forbes, and I'm doing an article on, would you talk to me?'"
Yep.
There's some other value that you can get out of it, but ultimately, you have to look at how much time am I spending on this activity, and is it yielding an outcome that is aligned with what I'm doing. Now, you might say, listen, I play golf. I've been playing golf for 25 years. I'm equally terrible today as when I started, but that's not an activity. I'm not looking to pay my bills on my golfing skills, right? That's that's an outlet. That's something I
Yep.
enjoy. That's a day in the, walking outside in the fresh air or whatever.
Yep. Yep. So I think that's a good place to wrap up. I think it's the we've talked through how to think about that leadership and what it is. We've talked about it needing to be um, relevant and um, really part of it is being courageous to take the chance and put stuff out there that might be stupid potentially in hindsight, right? I think are you really a thought leader if you haven't put your foot in your mouth at least once, putting something in public?
Yeah, and I
But
would say for most thought leaders, stupid is a temporary state. For plenty
right,
of people,
exactly.
stupid is a permanent state. That's different.
Yeah, yeah. But I think part of it also is like you do need to be. Maybe this is one thing we didn't touch on. Maybe kind of wrap a bow around this. Like the to be a thought leader, you have to be willing and courageous to put stuff out there, but also be willing to take the feedback and change things if it comes back that, oh, this was dumb. That didn't make any sense.
Yeah, no, 100%.
Right. So, all right. Well, let's see, we got maybe a couple more minutes. I don't know if anybody that's still live that has any questions. If you do, pop them in the chat here, either on LinkedIn or if you're on in the studio or on YouTube. But we'll maybe give people a minute or so to do that. Otherwise, in the meantime, Peter, where can people find you? I know you're on LinkedIn, but anything else you want people to do or know about you while we're wrapping
Yeah,
up?
they can find me on LinkedIn. They could go to our site, which is thoughtleadershipleverage.com. You can email me directly at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. You could wire me a large check. I'll give you my routing number if you're so inclined. That'll get my attention.
There you go. There you go. Awesome. And for those of you who don't know me, you can also find me on LinkedIn. And looks like no questions. So you know what? Let's let people get back to their day. It's late in certain parts of the country now with daylight savings time. So here we go.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Mike.
Peter, thanks for being on.
My
And for
pleasure.
everybody else, we'll be back in a few weeks with another episode of Consulting Growth Insights.